A judge who never cried in 25 years broke down because of one letter. The television courtroom had witnessed thousands of cases over Judge Judith Harlan's 25-year career. Cheating spouses, lying tenants, fraudulent contractors, every variety of human deception had paraded through that room. But in all those years, through all those cases, no one had ever seen Judge Judith cry. Not once. Her steel reputation was built on sharp wit, devastating cross-examination, and an absolute refusal to show weakness. Until the morning Daniel Mercer walked into her courtroom carrying a folded letter in the pocket of his worn military jacket. Daniel Mercer stood in the defendant's chair, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the wooden rail. At 67 years old, he looked older, much older. His face was weathered and lined, the kind of deep creases that come from sleeping rough and crying alone. The army jacket he wore was faded, patches barely visible, but the Purple Heart pin on his collar still caught the light. Across from him sat Laura Kincaid, 52, in a designer suit that probably cost more than Daniel had seen in 6 months. She was suing him for $8,500 in unpaid rent, property damage, lease violations, and refusing to vacate her apartment after eviction. Her leather briefcase sat open on the table, stuffed with documentation, photographs of destroyed walls, police reports, witness statements. Everything looked airtight. Everything looked like Daniel Mercer was just another deadbeat tenant who trashed an apartment and refused to pay. Judge Judith adjusted her glasses and looked at the case file. Laura Kincaid versus Daniel Mercer. Unpaid rent totaling $6,200, property damage estimated at $4,200. Lease violations documented over 11 months. She glanced up at Daniel, who stood perfectly still, staring at his hands. His posture was rigid, military bearings still visible despite the obvious toll life had taken on him. Judge Judith had seen thousands of defendants, and she had developed an almost supernatural ability to spot the truth within seconds. Something about this case felt wrong. Something about the way Laura sat with perfect confidence while Daniel looked like a man who had already surrendered to defeat. Laura spoke first, her voice cold and businesslike. Your Honor, this is a straightforward case of a tenant who destroyed my property and refuses to take responsibility. Mr. Mercer moved into my apartment complex in January of last year. For the first few months, everything seemed fine. Then the problems started. Noise complaints from neighbors, holes punched in the walls, broken fixtures. I tried to work with him. Your Honor, I really did, but he refused to pay for damages, refused to follow the lease terms, and when I finally had no choice but to file eviction, he refused to leave. I had to get the police involved 3 times. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a stack of photographs. The images showed a small studio apartment in shambles, fist-sized holes in the drywall, a broken bathroom sink, damaged door frames. Judge Judith examined the photos carefully, then looked at Daniel. Mr. Mercer, do you have anything to say about these allegations? Daniel lifted his head slowly. His eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted. For a long moment he said nothing. Then his hand moved to his jacket pocket. He pulled out a piece of paper, folded many times, the creases worn soft from being opened and closed repeatedly. The paper was stained, wrinkled, obviously carried everywhere. Your Honor, he said, his voice cracking slightly, I have this. It's from my daughter. She wrote it before she died. Judge Judith's expression shifted just slightly. She reached out and took the letter from his shaking hand. The courtroom went absolutely silent as she unfolded it carefully. Her eyes moved across the first few lines, and something changed in her face. The usual sharp focus softened. She looked up at Daniel, then at Laura, then back at the letter. She read it again, more slowly this time. The silence stretched out. Bailiff Carter, who had stood beside Judge Judith for years, noticed the shift and stepped slightly closer. The audience held its breath. Laura Kincaid shifted uncomfortably in her seat, suddenly less confident. Judge Judith set the letter down on her desk, but kept her hand on it, as if anchoring herself. "Mrs. Kincaid," she said quietly, "this letter is from Mr. Mercer's daughter. Her name was Emily. She was also a veteran Army medic, served 2 tours overseas, and according to this letter, she also lived in your apartment complex. She also fell behind on rent, and you evicted her while she was dying of cancer. 2 months before she passed away, the courtroom erupted in gasps." Laura's face went pale, but she recovered quickly. "Your Honor, I don't see how a personal letter is relevant to this case." Judge Judith leaned forward, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of barely controlled fury. "Oh, it's relevant, Mrs. Kincaid. It's very relevant because what this letter describes is a pattern, and I spent last night having my research team look into your business practices. What they found is going to change everything about this case." Before we go any deeper into what Judge Judith discovered about this landlord's treatment of homeless veterans, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button, because what gets revealed in this courtroom will make your blood boil. You're watching Justice Served, where we expose those who prey on America's heroes, and this case will absolutely shock you. Laura Kincaid had walked into that courtroom confident she would win another easy judgment against a veteran too broken to fight back. She had no idea that the letter Judge Judith held in her hands was about to expose a conspiracy that had destroyed 23 veteran families and turn her from successful businesswoman into the most hated predator in America. What nobody in that courtroom knew yet was that Daniel Mercer's daughter had written her final words not as goodbye, but as a weapon her father would finally have the courage to use. Judge Judith looked down at the letter again, her fingers tracing the worn creases. The handwriting was shaky, clearly written by someone whose strength was failing. "Mrs. Kincaid," she said, her voice controlled but tight. "Before we discuss Mr. Mercer's supposed property damage, I want to understand something about your business model. You own Liberty Grove Apartments, correct?" Laura nodded, regaining some of her composure. "Yes, Your Honor. 6 buildings, 140 units across the city. I've been in property management for 18 years. And you specifically advertise these apartments as veteran-friendly housing, don't you? Your website says supporting those who served. There are American flags on every building. You market exclusively to military families and veterans." Laura smiled slightly, as if this was a point in her favor. "Yes, Your Honor, I'm very proud of that. My father was a veteran, and I believe in giving back to those who served our country. I offer below-market rent to qualified veteran tenants." Judge Judith's expression didn't change. "How noble. Tell me, in the past 3 years, how many veteran tenants have you evicted?" Laura hesitated. The question clearly caught her off guard. "I don't keep an exact count, Your Honor. Eviction is always a last resort, but when tenants violate their lease terms or damage property, I have no choice. Try to remember." Judge Judith's voice was sharp now. "Roughly how many?" Laura shifted in her seat. "Maybe 10 or 12. That's out of 140 units over 3 years. It's actually a very low percentage." Judge Judith opened a folder on her desk. "According to public court records, you filed 23 eviction cases against veteran tenants in the past 3 years. 23. Mrs. Kincaid, not 10 or 12. Would you like to revise your answer?" The courtroom stirred. Laura's lawyer leaned over to whisper something to her, but she waved him away. "Your Honor, I may have underestimated. I file evictions when legally necessary. That's my right as a property owner." Judge Judith leaned back in her chair. "Let's look at the pattern of these evictions. My research team worked very late last night. Mrs. Kincaid, they found something interesting. Every single one of your veteran tenants who was evicted, had been living in your apartments for between 8 and 11 months. Every single one was charged for property damage that far exceeded their security deposit, and every single one was sent to collections when they couldn't pay the inflated damage claims. Does that sound like coincidence to you? Laura's face flushed. Your Honor, veterans often struggle with PTSD and other issues that lead to property damage. I'm sympathetic, but I can't absorb thousands of dollars in repairs because someone had a difficult deployment. Judge Judith's eyes narrowed. Sympathetic. That's an interesting word choice. Let's talk about Daniel Mercer's daughter, Emily. The courtroom went silent again. Judge Judith picked up the letter. Emily Mercer, Army medic, 2 tours overseas, honorably discharged in 2018. She moved into your Liberty Grove complex in March of 2020. She was undergoing chemotherapy for stage 4 breast cancer. Her medical records show she informed you of her condition when she signed the lease because she needed to ensure the apartment was accessible for her treatments. Laura said nothing, her jaw tight. In November of 2020, Emily fell 2 months behind on rent. Not because she was irresponsible, but because her chemotherapy treatments cost $8,000 per session and her insurance had gaps in coverage. She contacted you, explained the situation, offered to catch up on payments once her VA benefits came through. How did you respond? Laura's voice was defensive. Your Honor, I'm a landlord, not a charity. I have mortgages to pay, maintenance costs, property taxes. I can't let tenants live rent-free because of medical issues. So you evicted her. Judge Judith's voice was flat. You filed eviction paperwork against a dying woman who had served her country. Yes or no? Laura lifted her chin. I followed the law, Your Honor. I gave proper notice. I filed the correct paperwork. Everything was legal. Legal? Judge Judith repeated. Emily Mercer died in January of 2021. 2 months after you evicted her, she died homeless, Mrs. Kincaid. She died in a veteran shelter because you put her on the street while she was dying of cancer. The gasps from the courtroom audience were audible now. Several people shook their heads in disgust. Laura's lawyer put his hand on her arm, but she pulled away. Your Honor, I didn't know she was going to die that quickly. I'm not a doctor. I'm a property manager doing my job. Judge Judith set the letter down carefully. Let me read you what Emily wrote to her father. This was written 2 weeks before she died. She read aloud, her voice steady but strained. Dad, I'm sorry I couldn't fight the eviction. The treatments left me too weak. Mrs. Kincaid came to the hospital last week. She wanted to know when I would pay the $400 she says I owe for damages to the apartment. I told her I was dying. She said that wasn't her problem. Dad, if she ever comes after you, please don't give up. She targets veterans because she thinks we're broken, that we won't fight back. But we survived war. We can survive people like her, find a way to expose what she's doing. Don't let my eviction mean nothing. The courtroom was completely silent. Judge Judith looked up from the letter, and for the first time in 25 years of television, her eyes were wet. She blinked hard, her jaw clenched. Daniel Mercer stood with tears running down his face, not bothering to wipe them away. Laura Kincaid had gone pale, her earlier confidence completely shattered. Judge Judith took a slow breath, composing herself. Mrs. Kincaid, you came to a cancer ward to collect a debt from a dying woman. Laura's voice came out as a whisper. That's not how it happened. Then how did it happen? Explain to this court how you justified demanding money from a woman who was dying because she served her country. Laura had no answer. Judge Judith closed the folder. We're going to take a 15-minute recess. When we return, I'm going to show you exactly what my research team found about your business practices, Mrs. Kincaid. And I promise you, by the time we're done here, everyone will understand exactly what kind of person you are. The courtroom reconvened 15 minutes later, But the atmosphere had completely changed. Laura Kincaid sat rigid in her chair, her lawyer whispering urgently in her ear. Daniel Mercer remained standing, his posture somehow straighter now, as if reading his daughter's words aloud had given him strength he'd forgotten he possessed. Judge Judith returned to the bench carrying a thick folder, her expression unreadable, but her eyes sharp and focused. She sat down, opened the folder, and looked directly at Laura. Mrs. Kincaid, during the recess, I reviewed the complete financial records my team obtained from public filings related to your property management company. The numbers are very interesting. Laura's lawyer stood up. Your Honor, I object to the use of private financial records without proper discovery. Judge Judith didn't even look at him. Sit down. These are public tax filings and court documents. Your client chose to sue Mr. Mercer in my courtroom, which means I get to examine every relevant piece of evidence. Now sit down. Judge Judith turned back to Laura. In the past 3 years, your company has collected $427,000 in damage deposits and damage claims from veteran tenants. That's not counting regular rent, just the money you collected for alleged property damage. Laura shifted uncomfortably. Your Honor, property damage is expensive. Repairs add up quickly. I use licensed contractors for all work. Judge Judith flipped through several pages. Yes, let's talk about your contractors. The primary contractor you use for damage repairs is VK Construction Services. According to these invoices, VK Construction has charged your tenants an average of $4.200 per apartment for damage repairs. That seems extraordinarily high for the kinds of damage you've documented. Holes in walls, broken fixtures, stained carpet. A typical contractor would charge maybe $800 to $200 for that level of repair work. Can you explain why your contractor charges 4 times the market rate? Laura's face flushed. I use quality contractors who do thorough work. Judge Judith smiled, but there was no warmth in it. VK Construction Services is owned by Victor Kincaid. That's your brother, isn't it? The courtroom erupted in whispers. Laura's lawyer put his head in his hands. Laura's voice was defensive. Yes, Victor is my brother, but he's fully licensed and insured. There's nothing illegal about hiring a family member. Judge Judith leaned forward. Nothing illegal about hiring your brother, but everything illegal about price gouging vulnerable tenants and splitting the profits. Let me explain to this courtroom how your scam works, Mrs. Kincaid. You advertise veteran-friendly apartments at below-market rent. Veterans who are struggling, maybe dealing with PTSD or medical issues, or just trying to get back on their feet. They see your patriotic branding and think they found a safe place. They move in, they pay their deposit, they settle into what they think is stable housing. Then, after about 6 months, you start documenting violations. Little things at first, noise complaints, even though the other tenants never actually complained, minor property issues that you photograph extensively. You build a file. Then around month 8 or 9, you present them with a massive bill for damages, citing your brother's inflated contractor quotes. When they can't pay $4,000 for repairs that should cost $800, you file eviction. You keep their security deposit, you charge them for the phantom damages, you send them to collections, and you destroy their credit. Then you rent the apartment to the next desperate veteran and start the cycle again. Judge Judith paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the courtroom. 23 families in 3 years. Mrs. Kincaid, you've collected $427,000 in damage claims, but public records show your brother's company has only been paid $18,000 for actual work performed. Where did the other $49,000 go? Laura's lawyer stood again. Your Honor, these are serious accusations without foundation. My client runs a legitimate business. Judge Judith cut him off. Your client runs a systematic fraud operation targeting disabled veterans. I'm not finished. She turned back to Laura. Let's talk about Daniel Mercer specifically. He moved into your apartment in January of last year, just 11 months after you evicted his dying daughter. Did you know who he was when you approved his application? Laura.